Right. So, wait, wait on the lovely lady. So, the goal with my podcasts and with Uncommon Success is to work with people who. Right. So, I might need to stop that feedback 1 second. All right. So, people who've achieved extraordinary things from kind of common positions, I guess, is the theme that I want to go with on this podcast. And everybody has a unique and powerful story. And today we have Cam Aitken on, who has definitely a very unique and powerful story. I've known Cam for a number of years, and watching his journey has been massively inspiring. So we're going to talk about money, which is a subject that 99% of people, a lot of people are not really comfortable with talking about. And I'm going to talk about it with someone who's not saying he has tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. You can find all of those podcasts very easily. You can find a lot of materials from those sorts of people. What we're going to do is talk about a situation that's relevant to 90% of society, where you go from being in debt, being under financial pressure, to being in a position that you actually want to be in. Or at least a strong position relative to where you were. So that's the goal with the conversation today. So thanks, Cam, for making some time for us. Welcome.
Definitely. Thanks. Great to be on here. Thanks for the opportunity.
So talk to us a little bit, like, how did you get yourself into debt? Tell us a bit about like where you were.
Yeah. I guess so to give some context, like when we talk about debt, I was definitely further on the side of 100,000. So it was like 100,000 plus of personal debt. There was a little bit of business debt there as well, from projects that I was really hoping to get off the ground, but didn't quite have the right tools or education to do. But I definitely knew how to spend money on trying. So at the time, I'd been working as a chef for about 10 years. And, I was very much of the work hard, get rewarded type of mind of thinking. So, for those that are familiar with the hospitality industry, you're very much conditioned to work hard, play hard, and you always had more week left than you did your paycheck. So you got very good at juggling things in the regards to financial responsibility. And one of the part of the reasons, like in particular, that looking back at it, that I worked so much was because I couldn't afford to have essentially when I wasn't working, I was spending on things I shouldn't have been, whether it be alcohol, entertainment, non-functional recreational activities, things like that, or trying to woo the next female. So I just wasn't in a good place habits-wise with money already, and it's definitely a part of the environment that I was in. I was in, high-end restaurant venues whereby that was very much the mantra: work hard, play hard, party hard. So party and play were much the same, but definitely no emphasis on longevity or thinking about tomorrow.
Yeah. There are a lot of things there to touch on, like that discretionary income. Like, were you actually, was it that you weren't making enough money, or was it that you had habits that meant no matter how much money you made, you probably weren't, you're probably going to have more days left at the end of your week, as you're sort of saying, like the paycheck was never going to go far enough because of the habits, more so than, did your money go up, but your financial position stayed the same or get worse?
Definitely as a chef, like it kind of reaches a point where your age and experience grows and gets on, but your financial remuneration for your skill set doesn't. So you kind of reach like a financial plateau, if you will, within the industry, without getting into like I guess like what we would call like a retiree's job at like an RSL or an executive job in a hotel type gig. So if you wanted to stay with the big boys playing in that fine dining environment, then you definitely were more inclined to essentially take a pay cut for the opportunity to work in those environments. But as like you touched on, it was definitely a habits thing. I wasn't making bad money. I was definitely making decisions that there was no concern about the end of the week. As long as the mortgage was covered and the banks weren't calling me, then the rest of it was free game. It was almost like a I deserve it for working so hard type reward. Like really what I deserved was a good night's sleep and some proper food, but it's not what I was going for.
Yeah, that's the point. Once you travel a bit, I know you've traveled quite a bit as well, Cam. You sort of realize, well, in this country, people make about 10 grand a year. In this country, people make 40 grand a year. In this country, people make, and you see, regardless of the situation, it's the programming around money that makes the most difference. Like a lot of people would really kill for the kind of wage that you were earning. And you see that with migrant workers where they maybe have a different frame of reference and a different programming where they come to Australia, they work for $20 an hour and they feel like they're making, massive bank. And, they save half of that, they live together, they live, frugally, they save a bunch. And then they buy a house, they buy land back home, they pay for their parents' retirement, things like that. Just based on different ideals, different programming. I would say, most of us have that idea that you've had, whether it's, whatever you're doing with the money, the idea is like, if there's a bunch of money there, well, it's going to go into spending, whether it's to buy a house or whether it's to buy holidays, whether it's to buy cars or whether it's to buy whatever it is. We all buy different things. The plan is always to buy. Has that changed for you?
Yeah, definitely. Just touching on that as well, is like, I remember the first amount of savings I had, and I had a decent car, like, a secondhand car. It wasn't broken. My parents kind of taught me, like, if you didn't, like, I was raised with the concept, if you didn't have the money, don't buy it. And I had a bunch of money there. And my folks were like, my mum and dad were like old school conditioned, where it was like, cool, you must deposit, get a house. And so, that was probably the most sensible thing I ever did with the money under that kind of mapping of the time. And definitely in relation to what you're saying, it's sorry, I just lost track of what you'd said. I can't remember where I was trying to tie that in, but if you want to just touch on that again for me. Sorry. Yeah, I lost track of what you said. Sorry, mate.
You're good. Has the programming? You're good. Has the programming changed?
Yeah, definitely. So, I think the biggest part of my problem was that I didn't know what to do with the money, and so I treated it like it was always coming in. So there was never a scarcity around having it. I always knew that if I worked hard, I would make money, and so there was no need to like save it as such. As long as the bills were covered and everything was paid on time, whatever was left over I didn't know where else to put it. So over the journey of the last 3-4 years, learning about discretionary spending and learning like just 3 main horses to bet on, essentially, or 3 horses to kind of work harder than, or avenues to essentially work harder than I could. It started to help shape the shift in my way of thinking around money. And so now my money works harder than I do in certain avenues. Like I've got 3 main ones, and then I've got a couple of what they would call like a roughie or a punt that, if they take off, then, there's only more celebrating at the end of the day, not less misery.
So rather than buying a mortgage or buying a holiday, you're now buying a few things that could retire you, but you still have to buy. I think that's one of the big shifts that sort of happened in my mind. Like we have the same mentor with, Paul Council. The idea that you have to actually buy your wealth and you have to put money into things and then forget about those things to an extent and go back to work and plan on never touching that. Like that was a huge shift in my thinking that it seemed so foreign to me. I can remember like wrestling with that idea of like, what do you mean that you put money into something and you never plan to spend it. Like, what do you mean? That's not how it works.
Yeah, that was such a trip because like Paul was one of the first people that was the precursor for me to get out of debt. I wanted to work with him. He said no. I wanted to work with him. He said no. And then he broke down my debt and gave me a bit of a, gentle bop across the back of the head. And, I was paying 26 cents on the dollar when we worked it out on interest alone. And I was like, how am I ever meant to get ahead? And essentially his thing was like, you don't have anything to work with. So you can't go down the entrepreneurial journey that you want because you don't have the capital to go down there. So if you go and get the debt gone and then start doing these things where you go and invest in or put money aside for this and put money in this and put money in this and then forget about it, that now you've got room to create space to do the things that you're saying that you want to go down the pathway of. But before you do that, you've got to make money and forget about it. And that, like you said, it's like this strangest concept of knowing that, I'll go to work and I'll cut onions for $30 an hour. And, it's like a dick measuring competition on who's the most hourly rated chef in the kitchen. And I might be one of the medium earnings, but I know that before I got out of bed, I've made more money than they made that week. But it's not the point. The point is that that money doesn't exist. That opportunity doesn't exist. And tomorrow it could be gone. And so the only opportunity you have is that $26 to $36 onion an hour cutting job. It was a real ego and like just it was a massive journey in that self-awareness of trying to get my head around the whole concept of it, of like, you're making your money to live today and then making your money to live later. And what I love about working with Paul and like in the community that we're with is there's a lot of contrast in the sense, like, you've only got to look at your parents or, and your parents' parents and, they're essentially they're your role models for your future. And I remember that was one of the 1% groups there we were talking about, like your parents are your role models still. And you've only got to look at their future and go, is that what you want? And it's not to say that what your parents have done is wrong, but, if your grandma or, your grandparents, if they're still with you, or your parents are not investing in, say, fixing that sore shoulder because it costs $60 a week because it doesn't fit into their budget, is that what you want to be when you're 50? And if it's not, then you start putting the money aside now so that when you are 50, you can enjoy a life whereby you could go and get some new type of therapy that isn't around yet that might cost $60 that fixes the shoulder. But because you abstained from going out on the pub this weekend, you made a smart investment in, silver coins or gold or something, or Bitcoin or whatever's going around. And again, it's financial opinion, not advice. You kind of set yourself up for success at 60 and 50. And for me, it was like, and maybe for you as well, but it was like the first time I'd even thought that I think the biggest part for me was thinking past the age I was, because in the chefing environment, you didn't think past next year. Like most chefs in my environment were like, I'm gonna be lucky to see 40. And, and a lot of them, if they had kept going the way they were going, they probably would have been lucky to see 40. But a lot of us have kind of straightened up and flown right. But, and I think that forecasting into your future is, what kind of life do you want in the future? It makes not living in a 1-bedroom apartment in the city on the top floor with the best views and going out to the pub every weekend pretty easy to say no to in that instance.
Yeah, I think because we don't do the maths, if you did the maths, it's like, oh, it's only 5 years. It's only 10 years. I only need to work for 5 or 10 years. If I was saving at X amount, then after 5 or 10 years, I could effectively retire if I was able to find something that delivered X% of return. Like, we're not giving financial advice here, but it's a structure of thinking that it didn't occur to me. Like, I just thought you have to work harder, make more money. So I went from making, I lived on 10 grand a year as a backpacker or less in Latin America. And when I think I made 10,000 pounds for a year of work in England when I was 20, 21, 22 years old. I made 20 grand a year or so as a pool lifeguard in Australia, working part-time. I thought that was great. I thought by the time I was making 100 grand, life would be easy, and I'd be getting set up for life. Sort of that'd be enough. And then I made 100 grand a year, and then I made 200 grand a year, and then I made 300 grand a year, and I went down the same path everyone goes down. I bought a house, and I wasn't looking to make money with money. Like, it just didn't occur to me that the idea was like, I'm just going to work harder, and I'm just going to make more money in business, and eventually I'm going to be rich. And the thing is, like, I could have never have been rich with that idea, because I would only have kept spending. I guess at some point, it might work for some people. Like, if you look at Joe Rogan, you go, well, yeah, it doesn't matter what he's investing in, because he's just got cash coming out of every which way. I'm sure he is smart with it. He never talks about that kind of stuff, unfortunately. Maybe that's the most taboo topic that he really can't talk about, even though he's getting trouble for talking about the vaccine and stuff. But he never talks about the fact that majority of society is under financial pressure. He talks about people doing jobs they hate. He talks about people becoming entrepreneurial, but he never really gets into a conversation like this with someone who has got themselves into a strong financial position and kind of talks through some of this foundational stuff. So maybe it is one of the most taboo topics. It's one where most of us are quite uncomfortable about.
Yeah.
How have you found, like, having this conversation? Because you're starting to have this conversation with other people.
I find that it's like, numbers are scary for people, because there's nowhere to hide. 1 + 1 = 2. And when you've got the equation, then it's just about application of energy to solve problem. So, I remember when I did the numbers with Paul, like, I think I was at like an hourly negative rate. I was paying myself hourly based on my financial situation. I was paying myself like negative $37 an hour. Yet I thought my time was worth so much more, ignorantly. But once I did the numbers, I was like, well, shit, I want my reality to meet where I'm at mentally. So now I've got the work. I've got to double down and to make that number, at least a positive or a smaller negative every week. But once you get the numbers, it's also relieving, because you now have a plan, you have a process. But I think the numbers are scary. What I found in the conversations is numbers are scary for people, because we abstain from doing the work on the numbers to create, like, we live in a lot of people live in like redundant money maps, in the sense that, or redundant models of the world that, keeping up with the Joneses, for those that are a part of our community, like the free ride bias, society will take care of us. It's okay, work hard, you'll get rewarded, things like that. That we just believe that things are going to work out. And that's kind of like the downside of the Western society, is because most times, like, someone will come and look after you. But you got to look around now at the times, you can see quite quickly that that's not the case in a lot of places now. It's very quickly moving the other way with inflation and things that are going on. So the time is now to, like, kind of get less scared of the numbers. And it's generally the reality bites. And what I love about that kind of saying is, like, reality bites because you're kind of forced to eat it when it's in front of you. Like, you can either hooey it and say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. What do you know? That can't be real. And then continue on your way in keeping up with the Joneses and just not look back at it. In my experience, people that do that generally come back 8 months later, 12 months later and go, it didn't work. Like, what I'm trying to do is not working. Can you help me again? And they realize that if they had started then, they would already have been near the end of their journey with essentially the abstinence of the current life, in that sense. So yeah, it's definitely a conversation that's been enlightening for myself, because it draws a lot of spotlights on where I've still got work to do, but also where I've done a lot. Like, I've built a lot of foundations from being at rock bottom, as they say, and being able to build that, like, sturdy foundations with my financial health, which, whichever, insert your narrative here, if it's financial, mental, physical health, it's the same process of thinking. It's challenging to try and approach all three at the same time. My general focus has been money or financial well-being, and then where's my reality there, and then from there I found it overflowed into my emotional and spiritual health. And then from there, it's flowed over into my physical health. Whereas I had always put energy into physical health and some mental health stuff, but it was the one thing I didn't want to pay any attention to. That was the precursor for that better life in general.
And there's such a strong rejection. I think that's a key thing. We should get to, is money important? And, for a lot of people, they sort of say yes, and they sort of say, I'd like to have it. But then when you really ask, they kind of have the idea that money is evil. But I want to touch on that negative $37 an hour. How could someone work out what their real income is?
Yeah. So if you want to work out what your real income is, and I remember sitting at the table when we worked this out, and we were amongst what you'd consider some very successful entrepreneurs when Paul first brought this out. And he goes, this probably won't make me very popular at breakfast, but, and we worked it out. And a lot of people that you would consider to be financially stable were a bit taken back, if you will, in regards to where they actually sat in the map of hourly wages. So what you do is you want to do what we call a fire sale. So in short, like a fire sale is everything you own sold at bare market price. You get potentially what's owed on it. Your clothes and things like that don't count. Like your ring would be, what is the cost of gold at a sale price? It's not what your perceived value is. It's like, pretty much, if you think it costs 10, remove 10 to 15%, and that's what you're going to sell it for, because you're always going to think what you've got's worth more than what it is. I keep telling people my car's worth $500, but it's probably worth 50. And you want to just go from there. So you want to take your total fire sale balance, and then you want to take that and you want to minus the amount of debt that you have. So if you've got a house and you sell the house, does it cover the mortgage? If not, what's left over? If it does cover the mortgage, great. What's left over? Do you owe power bills, utilities, credit cards, shop store credit, things like that? That all gets added in. And you want to minus that from your sale profits. So if you have them, if you're already in a negative, like if your fire sales are zero and you've got debt, then now you're in a negative. Then you're going to take it and you divide it by the total years you've been working. And so the way you work that out is essentially it's the very first, how long has it been since you first started working to now? So it's 15 years. Then you want to take your debt, your debt dollar, or your total minus the debt, and you want to divide it by your total years. And then you're going to divide it by your total weeks. We work it out on 48 because most people take holidays and so forth rather than the full year. And then you want to divide that 48 by 38 hours, or what is your standard work week. And so for me, mine was more like an average of 77 hours based on my working career as a chef. And so it was like an even bigger shock, because when I did the math initially, it was like 38 hours. Then I went home and had a real honest conversation with myself and was like, oh, and that's where I kind of got there. And then your last bit is that once you divide it by that 38 hours, that'll give you your true hourly value. So if you're in a negative, you're normal. You're what most people sit at. And if you're in a positive of any more than $1, you're doing really well.
Well, you're better than common, better than normal, but I think common and normal is not a good place to be. But then if you work that out and you start asking yourself the question of, well, how could I make myself worth $5 an hour? Like, how could $5 of every hour that I work be for me, for my future, for me having choices, for me having opportunities, rather than giving it all to the system, to whatever that is, whether it's to the banks or to your big business in all the subscriptions that we sort of accumulate. Nothing wrong with having all those things, but where's the counterbalance of actually having something to show for how hard you're working and how much work you're doing? I know with you, Cam, like you worked your job, but then we also had that connection with network marketing. We had the network marketing business that we were building together. So it's not like you weren't looking for opportunities to increase your wealth and your financial position. It wasn't like you weren't working hard. It was the fact that the programming and the way that you were using your money, it wasn't getting you to where you wanted to be, right?
Yeah, it was definitely that, like, you've got to spend money to make money, but not in the functional sense of what we were talking about previously. It's like I felt like I needed to spend money on traveling to America to be part of the company education, or I felt that I needed to spend money to go over east, or I was justifying it based on business needs. But reality was I didn't need to be there spending that money. Really, I was spending that money escaping the responsibility that I had. But I also didn't know what the responsibility was because I never did the numbers. I never did the work on figuring out the reality of my reality, if that makes in a bit of sense there. And if you wanted to get from a negative to a positive, the easiest way to do it is focus on debt minimization. Because the more you minimize that debt, and if you can do it in a way whereby you can you get comfortable with that period of time that it's going to take you to do that debt reduction process, then, and it's just numbers, like it might take 6 months if you go all at it and no one ever hears from you for those full 6 months. It might take 8 months if you decide to give yourself a bit of a reprieve once a month and spend some of that money on what you look like, you get a free weekend. Or it might take 12 months to 18 months if you go a little bit more frivolously and have fun with yourself along the way. But ultimately, it's just you make that decision, and you've also got to be okay with, you set the goal, you might need to adjust it. Like for me, I set out the goal of getting into positives at 6 months, and I used the negative as a reason as a way to humble my ego. So when someone said to me, hey, do you want to come out to the countryside and dig holes? It's $10 an hour. You're going to be sleeping in a swag in a paddock. I was like, oh, it sounds like shit. I don't want to do that. But then I remembered I was at negative $37. And if I was out on a paddock sleeping in, under the stars in a swag, I wasn't spending money at the pub. I wasn't eating my own food. I was eating the farmers, and I was getting an exercise in. I was earning $10 an hour, doing something. So that wasn't spending money. So, and I'm going to remember I was negative 37. So if I'm going to get paid $10 an hour, and now I only made negative 27 for that period of time at work. So it kind of really
did you do that?
Yeah, I've done and I also went out and did, because when I was
fencing, was it?
I was like digging holes and in a paddock for one of the farmers. We used to go and stay out there when we did outback retreats with team building from a team out of Singapore. And so got to know the farmers out there. We used to buy cattle, like lambs and stuff like that. And so he was like, hey, you want to stay back and give us a hand? And I was like, no.
Yeah.
The other boys got in, so it was worth doing. It's good fun in the end. But
so you set that target of 6 months. When was that you actually made that decision?
It would have been, I can remember the memory of it. It was like I just figured it out, and it was like shit. And it was actually after a call. Paul, he was like, you could do it in 6 months if you focused, 8 months if you muck around, and 12 months if you're a jerk about it, pretty much. And I set the goal for 6 months because I knew it was of me. I knew that it wasn't my ability for my worker self to go to work. Like I was resistant to going back to working as a chef at that capacity. And that just had some physical elements. I was overweight. Mentally, I wasn't strong enough to I wasn't resilient enough. I didn't feel at that point to go back into a high pressure kitchen. My back was acting up because I was overweight and things like that. So I'd already convinced myself and created this story that I couldn't do it, which was part of the driving force to do it. Because I'm not a massive fan of telling myself I can't do stuff in that sense. So it was like I become obsessively defiant of my own story in that sense. And so I set the goal of 6 months to do that, but it ended up taking me nearly 12 months. But it wasn't because I was mucking around and being frivolous with my money in between. There was opportunities that came about within those 12 months to essentially put some money down on opportunities that would take my wealth further in the 5 years and 10-year gaps. So whether it was, there's the opportunity to buy some silver, or it was an opportunity to get in with cryptocurrencies when I first learned about them, or if it was to go to courses like retreats on copywriting. Even though it wasn't my jam, I wanted to be in the room with the people that were in the room because it was stretching my, essentially my map. of what was possible. And so it wasn't what I had to do was create a set of boundaries around when I made these decisions, what was the outcome and what was the cost benefit. And that's where it kind of go into the profit model of it, like that we hear a lot of, is the cost plus a dollar. So if I'm doing this experience, what's the cost and how does it return a dollar plus the cost? So if I went to Tasmania for a week to learn copywriting and it's going to cost me X, what is the cost plus a dollar? Like, what's my plan? So as long as I committed to a plan to have that return, then it was a business decision with myself to be able to invest that money in me. And I was okay then to move my goal backwards. It wasn't just a, hey, you want to go to the pub this weekend and see if we can talk about old times. It was, there had to be a bit of a commitment to it.
So this is something that I think about and wrestle with a bit. And Paul basically says the truth's in the numbers. If you have say you have a $500,000 mortgage, which is not uncommon for people, my age. If you have a $500,000 mortgage and people think, well, okay, yeah, I'm going to pay the mortgage before I start looking at opportunities, versus if you're looking at opportunities with a certain percentage of your discretionary income, money that you might have spent on going to Bali or, buying a fancy car, if you put some of that money into, say in 2013, 14, 15, you put that money into Bitcoin or whatever those opportunities are right now that we're maybe looking at and thinking, well, I think this is the next Bitcoin. What are your thoughts on, should I pay down the $500,000 debt, which is going to take 20, 30, 40, maybe it's never going to happen. Who knows, what's going to happen, versus, looking at that. That's kind of the scenario that you're talking about on a smaller scale, isn't it? That you were starting to invest in things that you thought might help you to pay your debt off faster.
Yeah. And I had a house at the time, and I had tenants. I had tenants in there since I owned it. So except for the time.
When you say you owned it, did you hold the title to the property?
No, sorry. I speak like I'm speaking normal tongue at the moment. The bank owned it. I just courteously paid the bank every month for the pleasure of having the deed to the debt. Yeah. And so I think it's important to have real conversations about what it is you actually have. And so like, a friend of mine recently purchased an apartment, 2-bedroom apartment type deal, townhouse, for nearly $600,000. And I was like, knowing what I know now, I'm like, wow, for the time that you're going to spend paying off that mortgage, to never get it paid off, really, to just get it to a point where now it's profitable for you to sell as an asset, or, as an investment, as you're told it is, you could do this, and then you could buy the house outright. And for that, I found was like too big a chunk for people to kind of get to, because you're really challenging a difficult social meme that we're told that property is secure and it's an investment in yourself and
safe as houses.
Yeah,
safe as houses. Who hasn't heard that? And sound as the pound.
Yeah, and I keep going back to this thing. Like my dad was always about, mow the lawn. I wanted the new push bike, because I used to build my push bikes out of scraps that I found at the dump, and had to save up for the tube and and all that kind of stuff. If I didn't have the money, I wasn't allowed to have it. I was walking. And so, but when I got older and I bought the apartment, my mum's voice came into my head of, because I wanted furniture. And this isn't like anything against my mother. It's just, this is the memory of it. It was, it's only a cup of coffee, because it was back when GE Money was giving interest-free periods for furniture loans and stuff. And I was like, I can furnish my whole house with all this new stuff. I don't have to go and get it from a thrift store for half the price. And, I was young, I was in love, so I had a partner, and I was like, better tick all the boxes, because I'm out to impress. I'm the future for her type deal, better provide. So I went and got this debt, and I paid it off within the period of time, did the work, but it was only a cup of coffee. And now that I'm older and I look back at it, it's so strange that we can justify going into debt in the past through a cup of coffee, for the price of a cup of coffee, yet people can't see the potential increase of wealth by not investing in the cup of coffee, but investing in the future cup of coffee. And it's like, it's too big a leap almost for some people to think that there's the potential of that $0 that thing you're buying that's already going to go to zero. I went for coffee today with a friend, or like for a meeting this afternoon, and $14. And I'm sitting there like, this person's talking to me about wealth and how they want to get ahead and so on. And I'm thinking to myself, we could have gone to my house and had coffee for free. You just took me here to spend $14. Like, we've already got a lot of work to do. And so, but it was great because it allowed me to draw the same contrast of that $14 invested every day, because, you know, most people spend that every day. When you run the compound effect on that, or you run any kind of potential return, there's no risk, because you've already removed the risk, because it's something you would have already zeroed. And it amazes me the amount of times I've seen this presented through Paul in your network or other networks I've been a part of, yet people still, it's like the light bulb just won't turn on, in the sense of, or the old habit becomes such a major driver that they can't see the potential of that $30 or 97. Like, they'll spend $90 on this thing that they have no idea, put no time in understanding or anything like that. But if they're going to spend $90 on a piece of education for 12 months, whereby it's all framed out for the network, they're kept safe in that, and they're allowed to help themselves to understand, they're resistant to it because it's them that has to do the growth. Versus, if I just put this here and it doesn't work, then I can blame that magical big person that's responsible for that thing that I never spent any time learning about. And so there's like a replacement of responsibility, where if you're over here and you're looking at the potential of $14 cup of coffee or $14 coffee date, and the potential return of that being, you do that twice, there's a silver coin. And we fast forward to hopefully an era that we never experienced, whereby silver becomes the standard. You're looking at $100 investment from a conversation in the park with a glass of water, a water bottle versus, So I think it's just a sense of ownership in that sense.
There's a key point here. Like, if you're zeroing income, then there's no risk. The concept of zeroing income isn't something that I'd considered before, but I was literally zeroing whatever I worked for, whatever I was earning, because at some stage I was going to spend it, whether I saved it in my bank account. At some point that was going to become spending, and therefore I didn't have the habit of borrowing, fortunately, until we got a house, until we got to deal with the bank for a mortgage. But if the money's being zeroed, then there's no risk. If you're buying silver, and people be like, oh, silver's too risky, or Bitcoin or whatever the vehicle is, like, oh, that's too risky. Well, hang on, you're taking the ultimate risk because you were zeroing it. So unless silver goes to zero, then you're ahead. Unless Bitcoin goes to zero, then you're ahead. Unless whatever goes to zero. And even if they were to go to zero, the fact is you've become that type of person who doesn't zero their income. And so even if you choose poorly once, twice, 3 times, the chances that you're going to choose poorly forever, that you're never going to become educated, that you're never going to meet other people who know, who have plans with their money, because you will start to associate with people who are doing this. They're not those zeroers. They're the people who are looking, okay, what is the next Bitcoin, And if some of that money that you would have spent in Bali, money that you would have spent in Las Vegas, money that you would have spent on fancy car, if some of that is like, I'm going to delay that, I'm going to delay gratification, I'm going to, for the next 5 years, for the next 10 years, until I get to X amount of wealth, I'm going to live simply, I'm going to work on my business, I'm going to work on my knowledge. That kind of concept, that kind of philosophy is uncommon. And it's certainly not the way, I was looking at things financially. I would say that since my philosophy on money has changed, it's also changed the way I look at business. It impacts the way I, spend my time, who I want to spend my time with, what I spend my time on. Can you talk a bit about like how you feel about yourself and who you've become through this money journey?
Yeah, man, it's I was writing it down today just before. I've been thinking about it since I booked in, about essentially just trying to relive who I was back then. It's so foreign to me. And if I was to, if I was to kind of like compare to contrast, it was like this: up front, if you met me, there was nothing wrong, but in the background, I was so lost. And now it's like, if you meet me, there's like, it's cohesive. Like, I have moments of feeling lost, but that's not because I am lost. It's because I'm venturing into something different or new. You know, when I was venturing out of debt, it wasn't my first time out of debt, but it was my first time getting out of debt with the plan to stay out of debt. And that was different because I was able to create that relationship with self throughout it and create that awareness, because I felt I kept looking at it like, we talk about it like leveling up. What I kept thinking about more was, is I'm on base ground as a human being. This is who I am at my worst, my most aware worst person at that point. And so what I kept thinking of more was, it was about breaking new ground. I'm not sure if it's still recording there. Frozen up, Keegs. Hey, Tommy, can you hear me?
Yeah, mate. Loud
Yeah,
and clear.
cool.
Got the recording sign up there too, bud. So you're right.
That's right. Must be just Keegs that's dropped out. I'll give him a minute to come back. For those that are playing at home, we are not experts in this particular field of technology, and that's okay. For those that are, I guess, on the live, I'll keep going, and then when Keegs comes back, I'll do a bit of a recap. But I wasn't looking at it like I needed to level up. I just kept looking like this is my base ground. I need to add more topsoil. I need to add more topsoil. I just needed to keep creating a better base to grow more of essentially like of going to seed and just continually going to seed and expecting that some things just wouldn't grow, and then taking the feedback from what wasn't working to be able to create processes or reassess if it was even important that it did work. And so like, it wasn't about becoming the best version of me. It was just improving the version that I knew I was at. And so I created better feedback loops. I created better insight into myself around failure and who I was and what I was, and essentially kept growing from there. I'm gonna just see if Keegs is coming back.
Yeah, it's a great story, mate. I love hearing it. Real hero's journey, really, eh?
Definitely layered through it. Now it's about bringing the elixir home, which is what we're doing now. So I guess like in relation to what Keegs was asking about, like who I was versus who I am now, I'm more confident when making decisions around money, because I'm able to stop and assess my current situation. We've moved myself like I'm better at removing myself emotionally, and also better at creating boundaries around money. So if like friends ask for it, it's like, cool, what's it for? I'm not scared to ask those questions anymore of what's it for? What's your repayment plan? Like, what do you plan to make repayments with? Like things like that. And generally when you start asking those kind of questions, they don't want to borrow the money anymore anyway, because now you're like, want to get into the depths and darties of what they're using it for. So I treat it like a business arrangement with that kind of thing. But in regards to like environment, for those that are familiar with it, within the Thrive model, the environment is really important in the validation side, in the sense that you want to make sure that who's around you and where you're around and the people you surround yourself around, you want to be around people that get it, who not going to pressure you to have, if you wear the same shirt 5 times. Hey, Keegs. Just talking about the the validate side of the Thrive model with regards to my environment at the moment. Just to give you a bit of a recap, I was saying like I wasn't, and like I wasn't at rock bottom. Like I was at rock bottom, but I wasn't trying to like level up. I was just trying to create more topsoil from where I was so that I could have better foundations to grow with. I find that often we're like, we got to level up or we got to get out of our comfort zone, or like these meme words that kind of create a lot of pressure and stress, kind of almost freeze people into taking action, where it was like, just assess where you're at, give yourself some honest feedback and just know that you can do better. Because your past has the history, your past provides the data to show that you can be successful. Like whatever you put your mind at, like getting into debt, that's a successing plan. You successfully got into debt. So if you look at your past in that sense, like you can really use the power of your past to catapult you forward if you create that kind of feedback whereby there's not right and wrong, negative and positive. It's just data. And so looking at my past, I was able to like create a better foundation of base. So when I did try and jump and reach for something that was maybe a little bit out of where I was aiming for, when I landed, it wasn't so far to land now. It was like getting up on your tippy toes and coming back down to your heels instead of like trying to jump from, you know, a cliff and then hitting the ground again. So, but in relation to environment, like it's not something, it's almost everything. I remember when I first decided that I was going on this journey, I said to friends, and you know, every Saturday night we would go to their place and they'd put on some food and, you know, we'd get drunk and have a bit of it. Like it was a real social event. And like that was my social outing for the week. But when I told them I was giving up alcohol because I wanted to create a better mental space to be able to be more creative and be more like to do the work. And because I was going to start working weekends again as a chef, their response to me was, oh, well, when you decide to have a drink again, let me know. There was no option of, hey, like just come around whenever you can. It was almost like the friendship was over. Now that could be my perception of it at the time, or my drive to kind of like disconnect from it. But I found that really interesting, that the people that I thought would be really supportive were the ones that actually became quite resistant, and the ones that were, I thought, not in it or supportive of me became the ones that became my biggest champions. And so like the environments, it's like a non-negotiable. If you really want to go after this or any kind of goal, you need to make sure you've got that environment that allows you to pursue it. And I think the biggest part as well is like create an environment where it's okay to slip up, because it's going to happen. And just while Keegs is trying to figure out his internet there, I'll go into the, I don't know, where do you go from here? I think as well, like just working backwards, you've got, like I've mentioned the Thrive model, and within our community, or not our community, but like within the communities that I'm like a part of with Keegan and Tommy, and for anyone else that might be watching from within there, like we talk about this Thrive model that, yeah, it's layered throughout the world of successful money generators, essentially, or people that's gone and set out a goal that just doesn't seem achievable normally. And it's got many different acronyms for it, but it's pretty much all, when you look at it, whether it's Joe Dispenza's work or if it's the Habit, the guy from Atomic Habits, or even the guy before then, where most of that, like some of that stuff comes from, the Habits book. I can't remember the guys' names, but I'll get the titles for you and the authors. But essentially the Thrive model is, you want to think, you want to create the habit, you want to rewire, you want to create some integrity around it, validate the effort, and then emerge. And well, while we still got time here and Keegs hasn't come back down, I'll break down briefly what these all mean. So to think is like to emote it into existence. So you want to be thinking about what it is you want. So if your goal is to remove debt, do the work. How much debt? How much money do you need to make that debt happen? How quickly do you want the debt gone? What are the obstacles that you're likely to overcome, and how are you going to overcome them? What are the people that are going to most likely trigger you to do that, and how are you going to overcome it? So the more you plan, and you may not know some of the questions to set out plans for or create emotions around, but as they come up, you need to stop and do the work. It's not a one-time affair where you can kind of get the results at that, essentially at that point. Like you're going to be, as you're going on the journey, different emotions, different things are going to come up, and you're going to have to do the work. So that's the think or the emote part of it. So just get super clear. Then it's about habits. So train yourself in essentially new habits, and then you want to go into creating anchors to essentially give you that awareness around what it is the old habit is. Like become aware of the old trigger, but then create habits to interrupt the old. So whether it's a piece of paper in your wallet that says like, do I need to buy this, or whatever it is that's going to message that's going to call out to you to kind of bop you in the face. And just get conscious about writing down new habits that you want, because you can't get rid of old habits. You can only write new ones and then practice them consciously till they become subconscious, habitual parts of you. And when they become that way, you got to expect that you've got more practice of using your right hand than you do of using your left hand if you're trying to learn how to use your left hand. So you're going to slip up every now and again. But when you slip up, it's about being aware that you're using your right hand and then going back and consciously using your left hand. And well, why did I use my right hand? Oh, the thing was falling. And that's when I went for my strong dominant. Okay, well, I need to be more conscious when something's falling, just to rewire it. So that's the rewire, and that's the habit side. And then the rewire is like the alignment. You want to make sure that your physical and your mental are like, as you're moving forward, your physical and your mental are going to catch up at some points, or you'll start to feel this case of like deja vu. And it is because you've already been there mentally. Your physical space is just getting there. So at the moment, I'm using this model with my health. Like what are the habits of an 80 kilo man? But I didn't start out with what are the habits of an 80 kilo man. It was what are the habits of a 90 kilo man, 95 kilo man, 100 kilo man. And so by the time I reached 100, I'm already thinking like a 95. By the time I reached 95, I'm already thinking like an 85, and so forth, or 90, and then creating bite-sized mental pathways for you to kind of move forward so you can bring that alignment in place. You can get help with this, with the alignment side, through like kinesiology or mindset, mental, essentially like people that rework your mental pathways with the way of thought or beliefs. And it's not cheating. It's the smart money puts money into rewiring habits or rewiring beliefs around certain traits. And so, don't be scared to ask for help there. And I think it's important as well, like when you're rewiring, you can't just rely on breath work and meditation and like bringing it into your world. Like you just can't. It has to be followed up with action, because most people will get into debt trying to manifest and believing that it's going to come. It's not how the world works. It's you can manifest it, but whatever's being manifested has to be manifested with the intent of action towards it. And so
that's a great one, Cam. That like doing it is going to be the biggest thing that's going to impact identity. Identity has to change. And so you change the identity by doing. So what can you do that brings on this identity? And I've set a few friends the challenge of investing $100, like putting $100 into something that you think will go up in value. So for some people, that might be buying one silver coin, which has been money for 5,000 or 6,000 years. Maybe it is a pet rock at this stage, but the chances of it going to zero are pretty slim. It's probably going to have some use, the way it's used in electronics and things like that. Maybe it's going to have an upside. Like people have been saying for 20 years that it's going to have a big upside, or 50 years. It hasn't happened. People have been losing money on it. But what if you did one of the traditional forms of money? And what if you did buy $50 worth of something else as a trigger for like, okay, well now I know how that works. Now I'm an investor and I can continue to build an identity around that. You covered so much there today, Cam. That was amazing. There was a storm here and my internet had some challenges. So I appreciate you soldiering on through those challenges. I know it was quite a big deal to sort of do this podcast and progress. And I've been hassling you about, go further with this. People need this. This is really important work that you're doing. I haven't been in that position of having, those kind of consumer debts and those issues that you've had. I had a mortgage at one stage, but your story is a very, very powerful one. So appreciate you sharing it today. I appreciate you sharing the tips. If people want to see more from you, what's the best path for them to go down?
Probably you can send me an email. So just Cameron Aitken at gmail.com. Just my first and last name at gmail.com. And then
perfect.
They can reach out on Telegram. It's at C_ammo. So camo at in Telegram there.
Perfect. I appreciate you making time for us today, and well done through the storm. Look forward to continuing the conversation. There's a lot more we could talk about on the positive side. Today was sort of how to not be poor or beyond poor, where you're actually in servitude, you're in debt. We can actually go more into the positive stuff another time. If you did enjoy this, then comment, like, subscribe, add questions, and I will put Cam's details there in the description as well. So thanks for connecting. Thanks for your time, Cam.